On the morning of December 1st, 1948, two men out for a walk along Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia, noticed something unusual. A man was lying in the sand, half propped against the seawall, facing the ocean. He was well dressed, dark trousers, a white shirt, a neat tie, polished shoes. His legs were crossed at the ankle, as though he had simply leaned back to watch the waves and drifted off to sleep. But he wasn't sleeping. He was dead. And from that moment forward, almost nothing about him would ever make sense. He had no wallet, no identification, no keys. Every label had been carefully cut from his clothing. Nobody reported him missing. Nobody came forward to claim the body. Nobody, in the entire city of Adelaide, or the entire country of Australia, admitted to knowing who he was. Police assumed an identification would come quickly. It didn't. They assumed someone would recognize his face. Nobody did. They assumed the cause of death would be obvious. It wasn't. And then, months into the investigation, a detective found something hidden inside a secret pocket in his trousers, something so small it had been missed in the initial search. A tiny rolled-up scrap of paper, no bigger than a fingernail. On it were two words, printed in fine type, torn from a book. Tamam Shud, Persian, meaning, it is ended. What followed was one of the strangest, most layered, most persistently baffling unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. A mystery involving a secret code that has never been cracked. A woman who may have known everything and said almost nothing. Theories of Cold War espionage, of secret identities, of poison with no trace. 75 years later, we still do not know, with absolute certainty, who the Somerton Man was. But we know more than we ever have. And the story, every layer of it, is extraordinary. This is the full story of the Somerton Man. Let's go back to that morning. December 1st, 1948. Somerton Beach, a popular stretch of coastline just south of Adelaide, South Australia. The two men who first noticed the body assumed he was drunk or sleeping. It was a warm summer evening the night before, and it would not have been unusual for someone to fall asleep on the beach. They walked on. Later that same evening, the night of November 30th, actually, because witnesses would come forward to say they had seen the man there the previous night as well, a couple walking along the beach also noticed him. He appeared to be raising his arm, they said, as though gesturing. They thought he was intoxicated. So by the time police were called the following morning and confirmed he was dead, the man had potentially been lying there for hours, in full view of the public, motionless on a busy beach, and no one had checked on him. That detail alone says something about the times. When the police arrived and began their examination, the picture became stranger by the minute. The man appeared to be in his mid to late 40s. He was fit, well-built, and in good health by external appearances. His hands showed no signs of heavy manual labor. His calf muscles, investigators noted, were unusually well-developed, the kind that come from a lifetime of physical activity or a specific kind of training. His feet were unusual too, high arches, and the shape of someone who had spent a great deal of time wearing pointed shoes, possibly a dancer, or a soldier, or both. His clothing was clean and carefully maintained, though clearly not new. A brown double-breasted suit jacket, tan trousers, a white shirt, a red, white, and blue striped tie, brown shoes, recently polished, a checked handkerchief in his breast pocket, a pack of juicy fruit chewing gum, a box of Bryant and May matches, an Army Club cigarette packet containing cigarettes of a different, more expensive brand, a bus ticket to Glenelg, and an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach. These last two items are interesting. He had tickets suggesting he had been traveling or intended to travel, but neither was used. He had apparently ridden the bus at some point, but where he had been before the beach and where he was going was unknown. And then there were the labels. Every single label, from his jacket, his trousers, his shirt, his tie, his underwear, had been carefully and deliberately removed. This was not accidental wear. The stitching had been cut. Someone had gone through every item of his clothing with a purpose, to make sure nothing could identify him. This is the kind of thing a professional does. Police checked missing persons reports across Australia. Nobody matched. They circulated photographs of the man, widely, for the era. No response. The autopsy, conducted by pathologist John Dwyer, deepened the confusion. The man's organs showed signs of congestion. His blood had a dark, unusual coloration. His spleen was enlarged to 3 times its normal size. His liver was engorged with blood. These are findings consistent with poisoning, but no known poison was identified. No needle marks. No pills in his stomach. No glass or container found nearby. No obvious cause of death could be officially confirmed. The coroner's inquest returned an open finding. Cause of death, unknown. The man was embalmed and a plaster cast was made of his face. A common practice then for unidentified bodies, intended to assist with future identification. He was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery on June 14, 1949, under a simple headstone that read, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." He was still unidentified. But the investigation was far from over. Because 2 months after his burial, a significant break came, or what looked like a break, that only made the mystery deeper. In January 1949, Detective Sergeant Lean was re-examining the man's clothing when he noticed something. In the fob pocket of the trousers, a small, almost vestigial pocket inside the waistband, there was something that had been missed. Folded tightly, rolled into a tiny cylinder, was a small piece of paper. On it were the words, "Tamam Shud." The phrase was recognized. It comes from the final page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of 12th century Persian poetry, translated into English by Edward Fitzgerald in 1859, that had become enormously popular in the English-speaking world. The phrase appears at the very end of the book, after the final verse. It means, simply, it is ended. It is finished. The scrap of paper had been torn from a physical copy of that book. Police launched a public appeal. Did anyone have a copy of the Rubaiyat from which the final page had been torn? The response took time. But eventually, a man came forward. He had found a copy of the book, a rare, second edition published in New Zealand, in the back seat of his unlocked car, sometime in late November 1948. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. He handed it over to police. The torn edge matched perfectly. But what police found inside the book was far more significant than the torn page. On the back and side cover, written in faint pencil, were 2 things. The first was a local Adelaide phone number. The second was 5 lines of capital letters, apparently random, in a sequence that looked like this. Rigobab Mliawi WTMTSTMPB Mpanip Mliaboayak. Some lines had been crossed out and rewritten. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. This was not a shopping list or a casual note. It appeared to be a code. Police called in cryptographers. The military was consulted. Over the following decades, amateur code breakers and professional intelligence analysts from multiple countries would attempt to crack it. During the Cold War, American and British intelligence services quietly took an interest. Nobody has ever definitively decoded it. The theories are numerous. It could be a one-time pad cipher, nearly impossible to break without the corresponding key. It could be the first letters of words in a personal message, using a key book that has never been found. It could be nothing, a meaningless series of letters, a personal shorthand, a red herring. But the phone number was real, and it led somewhere. The number was traced to a woman living in Glenelg, a suburb just a short distance from Somerton Beach. Her name, kept confidential by authorities for decades at her own request, was eventually revealed to be Jessica Thompson, also known at the time as Joe Thompson. When Detective Lean called the number, the woman who answered initially denied any knowledge of the Rubaiyat or of any man matching the Somerton man's description. But when she was shown the plaster cast of the dead man's face, in person, at the police station, Witnesses reported that she went pale, that she visibly reacted, that she appeared to recognize him, even if she said nothing. She was brought in for questioning multiple times. She consistently denied knowing who the man was. She consistently denied knowing why her phone number was written in a book apparently connected to him. She maintained this position for the rest of her life. Jessica Thompson died in 2007. She never officially confirmed knowing the Somerton man's identity. But what investigators learned about her life added a new and extraordinary dimension to the story. Jessica Thompson was, at the time of the investigation, a young woman in her mid-20s. She was a nurse by training. She lived in Glenelg with her husband and a young son. That son, named Robin, was born in 1947, roughly a year before the Somerton man was found dead on a beach within walking distance of her home. Here is where things get genuinely strange. In the decades following the case, amateur investigators and researchers began to notice something about photographs of Robin Thompson alongside photographs of the Somerton man's plaster cast. The ears, the distinctive shape of the upper lip, the jaw. There are physical resemblances that, to many observers, suggest a biological connection. The theory, never proven, but persistent, is that Robin Thompson was the Somerton man's son. That Jessica Thompson and the Somerton man had known each other, perhaps intimately. That the phone number in the book was not a coincidence, but a connection. And that whatever had passed between them, whatever had brought him to Adelaide, to that beach, that night, she knew about it and chose to take to her grave. There is something else about Jessica Thompson that later investigators found remarkable. She spoke Russian. This detail, uncovered decades after the original investigation, fed directly into the espionage theories that surround the case. Cold War tensions were at their peak in 1948. The Soviet Union had just consolidated its grip on Eastern Europe. Australia, as a close ally of Britain and the United States, was a target of Soviet intelligence operations. And Adelaide, specifically, was home to the Woomera rocket testing range, one of the most significant top-secret military research sites in the Southern Hemisphere. A well-dressed, unidentified man with no papers, found dead near a classified military facility, with a code in his pocket and a Russian-speaking woman's phone number in his book. It is not hard to see why intelligence agencies took notice. Jessica Thompson herself has been theorized as everything from an innocent bystander to a Soviet agent to a woman protecting someone else's identity out of love or fear. Without her testimony, which she never gave, the truth remains inaccessible. But in 2009, something changed. Her daughter, Robin Thompson's sister, gave an interview in which she said that her mother had admitted, late in life, to knowing who the Somerton man was, that she had recognized the plaster cast immediately at the police station, that she had, in fact, known him. But she said her mother refused to say more, even to her own children. Whatever she knew, she kept it. Why? What was she protecting? Was it herself? Was it him? Was it someone else, someone still living, or someone whose reputation or safety depended on her silence? We don't know. What we do know is that the identity of the Somerton man, for over 70 years, remained officially unknown, despite one of the longest cold case investigations in Australian history, despite global media attention, despite generations of amateur sleuths and professional researchers devoting years of their lives to it. Until, perhaps, very recently. Before we get to the DNA breakthrough, let's take a moment to look at the broader theories, because the Somerton Man case is really several mysteries layered on top of each other, and it's worth separating them. Mystery 1. Who was he? The most fundamental question. A man died on a beach with no identification. Who was he? The espionage theory is the most dramatic and, to many researchers, the most credible. In the late 1940s, Australia was hosting classified military research at Woomera. British and American intelligence were both operating in the country. Soviet intelligence was actively trying to penetrate Allied secrets. An agent, operating under a false identity, with all identifying markers removed, dying under suspicious circumstances near a classified facility, fits a recognizable pattern. The poison that killed him, many believe, was a fast-acting cardiac glycoside, a compound found in plants like foxglove or oleander, which causes heart failure and metabolizes quickly, leaving little trace in an autopsy. This was a known method used in Cold War assassinations. But there are other theories too. Some researchers believe he was a former soldier, Australian, British, or American, who had gone off the grid after the war. Post-war Australia had a significant population of displaced veterans, some of whom had reinvented themselves with new identities. The war had ended only 3 years earlier. The world was full of people with reasons to disappear. Others have suggested he was a circus performer or acrobat, pointing to his unusual leg muscles and foot shape. A traveling entertainer, perhaps, with no fixed address, no family to report him missing, and no reason to carry identification. Mystery 2. What does the code mean? The 5 lines of letters on the back of the Rubaiyat have never been conclusively decoded. The most widely accepted theory among cryptographers is that they represent a one-time pad cipher, a type of encryption that, if used correctly, is mathematically impossible to crack without the key. If the Somerton Man was a spy, a one-time pad would be exactly what he would use. But here's the problem with that theory. The lines are too short. A real one-time pad message would typically be longer. And the repeated sequences suggest it might not be a cipher at all. It might be an acrostic, or the initials of a personal message, or something else entirely that we haven't thought of yet. Some researchers have noted that certain lines appear to have been crossed out and rewritten, which is unusual for a coded message but consistent with someone drafting something personal, like a note or a list of names. Nobody knows. Mystery 3. Why the Rubaiyat? The choice of book is strange on multiple levels. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is a collection of meditations on mortality, the passage of time, and the acceptance of life's end. The most famous verses deal with themes of fate, impermanence, and the futility of fighting death. The final words, Tamam Shud, it is ended, are the closing of the book, both literally and philosophically. Did the Somerton Man choose this book deliberately? Did the phrase mean something personal to him? Was it a message, a final statement, left intentionally in his pocket? Or was it coincidence, a book picked up somewhere, torn by accident or by someone else? Some researchers believe the book itself was a signal, that leaving the phrase Tamam Shud on his person was deliberate, a statement that his mission was over, his life was over, and whatever he had been sent to do was finished. If so, it raises a darker question. Did he choose to die? Was this suicide? Was he ordered to die? Or was he killed and the paper placed on him by someone else, as a message to whoever found him? The coroner could not rule out suicide, but there was no note, beyond, perhaps, those 2 words. For decades, the Somerton Man lay in his Adelaide grave, exhumed once, in 2021, after a long legal battle by researchers who believed modern forensic science could finally answer the question that had haunted Australia for 70 years. The exhumation was approved by the South Australian Attorney General after years of applications, legal challenges, and public debate. The case had never officially been closed. The grave, remarkably, was intact. In May 2022, a team led by Professor Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide, who had spent over a decade obsessively researching the case, and assisted by forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, announced that they had a result. The DNA evidence, combined with forensic genealogy techniques, the same methods used to identify the Golden State Killer in the United States, had produced a name: Carl Charles Webb. Born in 1905 in Thomastown, Victoria, an electrical engineer and instrument maker by trade, married, with a child, and, according to records, estranged from his wife for some years before his death. The identification was based on matching DNA from hair follicles preserved on the plaster cast of the Somerton man's face, made at the time of the investigation, with descendants identified through genealogical databases. It was, if confirmed, the answer to the most basic question in the case. Who was he? But, and this is where the Somerton Man case continues to be the Somerton Man case, the identification did not close everything. It opened new questions. Carl Webb had no known connection to Adelaide. He had no obvious reason to be on Somerton Beach in December 1948. He was not reported missing by his estranged wife. His professional background, electrical engineering, instrument making, is consistent with the kind of skills useful in intelligence work, but there is no confirmed evidence that he was a spy. And the code in the book? Still uncracked. And Jessica Thompson's connection to him, if Carl Webb is indeed the Somerton Man? Still unexplained. How did she know him? Why did she deny it? What was the nature of their relationship? Professor Abbott himself has acknowledged that the identification of a name does not automatically explain the circumstances of death, the meaning of the code, or the full human story behind the case. Some researchers have questioned the identification, arguing that the DNA match is not conclusive enough to be definitive. Forensic genealogy, while powerful, involves degrees of probability, and the sample quality, taken from a decades-old plaster cast, leaves room for uncertainty. The South Australian police have not officially closed the case. So we have a name, possibly, and we still don't have an explanation. In many ways, this is the perfect ending for the Somerton Man case. The mystery does not yield cleanly, even when science arrives. It gives a little ground and then retreats behind another door. Let's take a step back from the forensics and sit with what we actually know about this man's last hours, because reconstructing them is its own kind of haunting exercise. Sometime on the evening of November 30th, 1948, a man arrived in Adelaide. Or perhaps he had been in Adelaide for some time, we don't know. He carried a suitcase that was later found at Adelaide railway station, checked into a locker. The suitcase contained clothing, again, with all labels removed. Thread in the clothing matched thread found in his trouser hem, suggesting he had done repairs himself. He was careful. He was methodical. He was clearly trying not to be identified. At some point that evening, he traveled to Glenelg, near Somerton Beach. He had a bus ticket. He may have visited someone or tried to visit someone in the area. He may have gone directly to the beach. He settled against the seawall, legs crossed, facing the ocean. He may have been alive for hours. 2 people saw him that evening and assumed he was drunk or asleep. At some point, he died. No struggle, no witnesses, no sound. Just a man, alone on a beach, at the end of whatever story had brought him there. If he was poisoned, someone administered it, or he administered it himself. If it was self-administered, he had access to a substance sophisticated enough to leave almost no trace in an autopsy. That is not something an ordinary person carries. That is something a trained person carries. If someone else poisoned him, they were skilled enough and careful enough to leave no evidence whatsoever. Either way, he knew what was coming, or it was done to him without warning. The Rubaiyat, with its meditations on mortality and acceptance, had been in that unlocked car in Adelaide for at least a week before his death. Someone put it there. Was it him? Was it someone he had met? Was it a message left for someone to find later? And the words Tamam Shud, it is ended, folded into his secret pocket. A final statement. A period at the end of a sentence the rest of the world could not read. Whatever his name was, whatever his story was, whatever had brought him to that beach, he had decided, or someone had decided for him, that it was finished. The Somerton Man case has outlasted generations of investigators. It has been the subject of books, documentaries, university research programs, and thousands of hours of amateur investigation on internet forums. It has attracted cryptographers, genealogists, Cold War historians, and people who simply find themselves unable to let it go. Why? Part of it is the puzzle itself. The code, the missing identity, the silent woman. These are the raw materials of mystery, and the human brain is wired to want resolution. We are pattern-seeking animals, and a pattern with a piece missing is almost physically uncomfortable. But I think there's something deeper than that. The Somerton Man represents the ultimate expression of a fear most of us carry somewhere. The fear of dying unknown, of passing through the world and leaving no mark, of being found, one day, in a place no one expected, with nothing that explains who you were or what your life meant. Most of us leave traces everywhere. Our names are on documents. Our faces are in photographs. Our voices are in recordings. We are stitched into the fabric of other people's lives in 1,000 ways. Even in death, we are findable. We are knowable. This man, whoever he was, removed all of that. Deliberately, carefully, completely. He made himself unknowable. And the question that haunts the case, even now, even with a possible name, is why? Why would someone do that? What kind of life leads to a decision like that? What were they running from? What were they protecting? What had happened to them, or what had they done that made invisibility feel necessary? The espionage theory offers one answer. He was a professional, trained to leave no trace, and his death was the final act of a clandestine life. The answer is cold and procedural. He was nobody because being nobody was his job. The personal theory offers another. He was a man in crisis, perhaps in despair, who came to a beach at the edge of the world and chose to end things, and chose to do it in a way that would burden no one with the knowledge of his name. Both are sad. Both are human. Both leave something unresolved. Because even if Carl Webb is the Somerton Man, and even if we eventually confirm that beyond any reasonable doubt, we still don't fully know his story. We don't know what brought him to Adelaide. We don't know what passed between him and Jessica Thompson, if anything. We don't know what the code means. We don't know whether he chose to die. A name is not a story. And the Somerton Man's story, the real one, the full one, may be permanently beyond reach. There is a grave in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery. The stone is simple. For decades it read only, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." When the body was exhumed in 2021, researchers handled the remains with the care you would give to someone important, because in a strange way, he had become important. Not for what he had done in life. We still don't know what that was, but for what his death had left behind. A question, an open wound in the historical record that refused to close. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is a book about impermanence, about how everything, every life, every love, every certainty, eventually passes. The Persian poet Khayyam wrote, roughly 9 centuries ago, that we are here briefly, that we understand little, and that the wisest response to existence is to live it with openness rather than clutching at permanence. Tamam Shud. It is ended. Whether those words were a message, a confession, a farewell, or simply a torn piece of paper that ended up in the wrong pocket by accident, they have become the defining words of one of the strangest cold cases in history. The man on the beach has a possible name now. Carl Webb, an engineer from Victoria, a man estranged from his family, whose path led him, somehow, to a beach in Adelaide on a summer night in 1948 and stopped there. But the deeper questions, who was he to the people who knew him? What had his life been? What did he carry to that beach that had no name, no label, no identifying mark? Those questions remain as open as they have ever been. Some mysteries are solved. Some are closed without being solved. And some, like this one, achieve a strange kind of permanence. Not because we know the answer, but because the question itself has become a part of history. The Somerton Man has been lying on that beach, in a sense, for 75 years, faced toward the ocean, waiting. Whatever he knew, and whatever he meant by leaving those 2 words in his pocket, he has kept it perfectly. It is ended, and it isn't. Thank you for watching. The Somerton Man case is one I could spend another hour on. So if you want a deeper dive into the code, the DNA science, or the Cold War espionage angle specifically, let me know in the comments and I'll make it happen. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And tell me, do you think Carl Webb is really the Somerton Man? Or is the case still open? I want to know what you think.